Direct News TV. June 13, 2024. Russian Navy fleet, including frigate, nuclear-powered sub, arrives in Cuba. Russia's Admiral Gorshkov frigate and the nuclear-powered submarine Kazan, accompanied by a tugboat and a fuel ship, have arrived in Cuba for a 5-day visit seen as a show of force by Moscow amid rising tension over its invasion of Ukraine. Curious onlookers, fishermen, and police gathered along the Malecon seafront boulevard in Havana to welcome the fleet as it entered the city's harbor on Wednesday. Cuba, a longtime ally of Russia, saluted the vessel's arrival with a 21-gun salute, while Russian diplomats waved small Russian flags and took selfies against a backdrop of the harbor's historic fortresses. The 4 Russian vessels conducted high-precision missile weapons training in the Atlantic Ocean while on their way to Cuba. The submarine and frigate are equipped with Zircon hypersonic missiles, Kalibr cruise missiles and Onyx anti-ship missiles, the Russian Ministry of Defense said. The unusual deployment of the Russian Navy so close to the United States comes after Washington and some of Ukraine's other Western allies allowed Kiev to use their weapons on targets inside Russia amid a renewed Russian assault on northeastern Kharkiv and battle troop and ammunition shortages. Havana lies just 160 kilometers, 100 miles, from Key West in the southern state of Florida, where the U.S. has a naval air station. The warships are a reminder to Washington that it is unpleasant when an adversary meddles in your near abroad. Benjamin Geaton, director of the Latin America program at the Washington, D.C.-based Wilson Center think tank, told the Associated Press news agency, referring to Western involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine. It also reminds Russia's friends in the region, including U.S. antagonists Cuba and Venezuela, that Moscow is on their side, he said. Cuba said last week that the visit was standard practice by naval vessels from countries friendly to Havana and that the fleet was not carrying nuclear weapons. The U.S., which has been monitoring the vessels, has also played down the deployment. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters on Wednesday that such naval exercises were routine. "We have seen this kind of thing before, and we expect to see this kind of thing again, and I'm not going to read into it any particular motives," Sullivan said. He added that there was no evidence of Russia transferring any missiles to Cuba, but the U.S. would remain vigilant. Not October 1962. The port call coincided with a meeting in Moscow between Cuba's Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov. During the meeting, Rodriguez expressed his government's rejection of the expansion of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO towards the Russian border, which he said led to the current conflict in Europe, and especially between Moscow and Kiev, according to a Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement. He also called for a diplomatic, constructive, and realistic solution to the conflict. During the Cold War, Cuba was an important ally of the then Soviet Union, and when Moscow responded to a U.S. missile deployment in Turkey by sending ballistic missiles to Cuba, the standoff brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Since the Soviet Union collapsed, Cuba has maintained relations with Russia, and the two countries have become closer since a 2022 meeting between Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel and Russian President Vladimir Putin. For Havana, the relationship is driven mainly by economic necessity as it grapples with shortages of everything from food and medicine to fuel. The U.S. has maintained an economic and trade embargo on Cuba since 1960. This is not October 1962 again, Javier Farge, an expert on Latin American politics, told Al Jazeera. This is a different time. Cuba has become increasingly dependent on Russia because of the lack of economic development. Russia in March delivered 90,000 metric tons of Russian oil to Cuba to help alleviate shortages and has promised to help Havana in projects ranging from sugar production to infrastructure, renewable energy, and tourism. The Russian ships are expected to remain in Havana until June 17. U.S. officials expect the Russian ships to remain in the region throughout the summer and possibly also stop in Venezuela. My name is Kingsley. Please like, share, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can be the first to be notified whenever we post. You won't regret it.